First, I would like to go over Calcula. Hey yo, and welcome back to my channel where I talk about writer things, parent things, and writer-parent things. This week I'm going to be talking about the dys disorders, mostly dyslexia though. Please do keep in mind that these videos are based on my personal experience and knowledge, which is not always universal, especially for something like dyslexia. I've seen a lot of people request writing tips and advice for writing with dyslexia. However, they usually ask somebody who, well, doesn't have dyslexia. And, you know, I do. So I decided to make some videos talking about writing and dyslexia, starting with this one, where I'm going to talk about some of the dys disorders and dyslexia. Now, for those who don't know, there are groups of disorders that all start with the syllable dys, and I'm not super familiar with most of them, but I'm going to go through the ones that often get confused with dyslexia and at least summarize them as best I can. There are some disorders that I'm not going to touch on because they're not related at all, but they do start with dys. And again, I'm not super familiar with all of them, but I'm going to do my best to be clear because sometimes they get mixed up with dyslexia, and I think that's worth noting. Now, a little heads up, I should have said this at the beginning of the video. I may even move this to the beginning of the video, but I am dyslexic, and therefore I am probably going to at least glance down at the script when I'm saying some of these sometimes, because a lot of the disorders are very similar in name, and I don't want to accidentally get them confused and then not catch it. I would first like to go over Dyscalculia, which is really hard for me to say, so we're just gonna go with that. And Dyscalculia is the one that gets mixed up with dyslexia the most in my personal experience, which is actually pretty understandable. See, dyscalculia is used to describe a specific set of disorders that affects someone's ability to understand, learn, and perform math and number operations, which dyslexia does something like really close to that, and also can affect reading numbers. However, one major difference between dyscalculia and dyslexia is that people with dyscalculia can often have trouble doing even the simplest of addition and subtraction math operations, which is a pretty specific and significant difference between the two. If you want to know more about dyscalculia, I heavily suggest doing a lot of research on it, because we're on to the next one. Dyspraxia, also known as the developmental coordination disorder, is a neurological disorder that affects the fine and gross motor skills. Much like dysgraphia, except dyspraxia can affect the fine and motor skills for everything, not just for writing. Again, there is a lot to this disorder, and I heavily encourage personal research into all of them, especially since a lot of them have crossover symptoms, but I'm just giving basic definitions. Here we go. Dysgraphia is a neurological disorder of written expression that can impair writing ability and fine motor skills. It can interfere with all aspects of the writing process: legibility, spelling, spacing, and expression. From what I understand, this is specific to handwriting, although it can affect somebody's ability to use certain things on a computer. From what my research said, it had a lot of crossover symptoms with dyslexia, but a lot of these have crossover symptoms with each other. It's like a large spiderwebby diagram. There were a few other dys disorders, but they were mostly trauma and injury related and unlikely to be mixed up with dyslexia, so I didn't really want to go over them in this video. But that means that here we are at dyslexia. Okay, so that was a lot to go through. And now I want to just first say that there are types of dyslexia, and there are more types of dyslexia than I knew. We're starting with dyslexia at its core. And dyslexia at its core is a learning disability that makes it difficult for somebody to break words down into their component phonemes. That's how we're gonna say it. which is apparently a really crucial skill for learning how to spell and write and read. Even more fun with dyslexia is that no two people experience dyslexia in the same way, which I can personally attest to this because my papa, me, my mom, and my two sisters all have dyslexia, and while we do share some things in common, boy are we different in big ways. Like, I have never experienced floating letters or written my numbers backwards. However, to this day, my mom will still write her 2s and her 5s backwards. And apparently, my baby sister does that too. I do, however, experience an issue that I like to call chameleon letters. It is not at all the name for it. I don't know if there is a name for it, but I digress. It's basically when I see a word spelled correctly, this word in my eyes is 100% spelled correctly. It is the correct word. And then somebody else will point it out to me, and it's like this weird magic veil has lifted and suddenly the typo is visible. Gods, do I hate it. But this is why apparently researchers have attempted to group dyslexics into different categories. I'm going to link below an article I found very helpful on this. No, it wasn't my only source, but it is the one that I pulled from the most for this. So because it is very late at night and I'm trying out a new migraine treatment, I'm just gonna be kind to myself and read the definitions from my script. Hope everyone's okay with that. Just enjoy the lovely eyeshadow. First, we have phonological dyslexia. 75% of people with dyslexia experience a difficulty in breaking speech into individual sounds, which, to be clear, they can process and replicate the sounds of their native language. The difficulty comes up when they're trying to break a word down, which, is an issue with learning to read or write or even encountering new words when you're reading, because we're taught to sound the word out in order to read it. Next is surface dyslexia, which makes it take longer to process language when it's time to move beyond the decoding stage. This is basically when we're told I before E, except after C, and then there's some sort of continuation of that rhyme with weight and eight and height, etc. I mean, yes, those kind of things can be tricky for just about anybody. However, someone with surface dyslexia has trouble seeing the whole word itself, so it's probably going to take them a lot longer than somebody without surface dyslexia to figure out what the fuck is that word. Visual dyslexia impacts visual processing. People with this dyslexia may have trouble reading and remembering what it is they read because this impacts the visual processing in the brain. The brain doesn't get the full picture the eyes are sending it. That can make it harder to learn to form letters, master spelling, and to remember proper letter sequences. There's apparently also something called perceptual dyslexia, which means somebody has trouble seeing the whole word, but I don't really understand how that would be any different from surface dyslexia, but it was in the article that I linked down below, and the article also implies that there's a lot of other different kinds of dyslexia, so I guess just keep in mind there's even more specific kinds of dyslexia. Now, the next 3 kinds or types of dyslexia really, to me, just say the origin of your disorder, which is still important. So here we go. Secondary or developmental dyslexia, which is infections or sometimes poor nutrition in the womb can lead to developmental issues that can cause neurological impairment, leading to, ya guessed it, dyslexia. Of all types of dyslexia, this one apparently responds to treatment the best. So that's pretty chill. Next is trauma or acquired dyslexia, which is when someone has a brain injury from trauma or disease and it results in developmental difficulties with language processing, which results in, what do you know, dyslexia. Finally, we have my kind of dyslexia, primary dyslexia, because we're primary dyslexics? Primary dyslexia is when one or both parents genetically pass dyslexia down to the future generations. Oh, so graciously. Now, interestingly, This runs in families. As demonstrated earlier, it definitely runs in my family. Although research says that it usually shows up more in males. Yeah, my family didn't get that memo. But also shows up more with people who are left-handed, which, fun fact, I believe I was born left-handed because I shoot a bow left-handed, and the few times that I've tried to write with my left hand, it was already as legible as my right hand. I just think when I was a kid, nobody really thought, hey, put a pen in your left hand. Instead, they were like, hey, rewrite your homework 80 times. Now, that was a lot of medical information, and I was as accurate as I can humanly possibly be. So I hope everything was accurate. As I have stated probably several times, you may even be tired of hearing me say this, but a lot of these have overlapping symptoms. And sometimes people can even have more than one of them at the same time. As previously stated, I have primary dyslexia. And growing up in the 90s in my area, not a lot was known about dyslexia. Most people I know had no idea what the fuck it was. And it ran in my family, so it was just kind of seen as like family quirks, especially since we all experienced it differently. So like, nobody really looked at anybody else with dyslexia and was like, oh, well, you're doing things a lot different, aren't you? We just kind of learned how to cope with it on our own. Now, I totally fell into the group of kids that was told, you're so smart, but so lazy, and asked why I didn't just apply myself. And like, let me tell you, I could not read very well until the 4th or 5th grade, and that's only because my mother bribed me with fake jewelry that I decided to buckle down and really put the effort into learning how to read. Math? I hated math. Who is that? I don't know them. Until one weekend, my papa was home from driving truck, and he was like looking at my homework, and then he told me how he would have done it in his head, and that made total sense to me. And from that day forward, I have never felt anything but love and adoration for math. And like, between those two instances, which happened around the same time, I just didn't feel stupid anymore. It was like, okay, I just don't think about things the same way that everybody else thinks about them. And if I really, really force myself to read, I can kind of overcome or cope with the issues. If I have to reread a paragraph 5 times for it to stick, I just reread a paragraph 5 times, and then eventually it stuck and I moved on with the page. So basically from that point on, I just said fuck it, and I taught myself how to do it the way that I needed to do it in order to learn. I would listen to music while I was studying, and then later when I was taking a test, I would think of those songs so that I could recall the facts that I needed to pass my test. I became obsessed with languages and their phonetic breakdowns and how language worked. The fact that different languages had different sound groupings, and growing up learning one language over another language would actually change the way that your mouth naturally shaped to make sounds, utterly fascinated me as a small child. And I would not let the fact that I had to learn things differently and that I had to teach myself how to learn things differently hold me back from learning, because I just really loved learning. That was all before high school too. That was elementary and middle school. By the time I got to high school, we had a lot of reading assignments and computerized tests, especially since I took AP classes. And gods, do I hate computerized tests. Which, looking back, because what I hated about the computerized test was that the words would seem jumbled to me, or I just wouldn't be able to remember what I was reading. It's probably the font or something like that, now that I understand more about dyslexia. Because if you gave me the same test on paper, I could ace it, no problem. But on the computer, I had no hope. It was a huge relief to me to find out that dyslexia was a thing, and it's what I had. Because all of a sudden, those mix-ups, those little fuck-ups that I had every now and then, it wasn't my fault. I wasn't stupid. I wasn't just somehow not as capable as everybody else. No, I just had a learning disability that made it to where I didn't process the same way. And that's fine. And now when I mess up or when I fuck up, I just get amused most of the time. Like for a chapter that I was reading for one of my critique partners, the opening line was a fist to the face. And what I read was a fish to the face. And I shared this with my critique partner and we both just had a really good laugh about it because it's just a fish being... you just have fun with it sometimes. Before I knew that those mess ups were most likely caused by my dyslexia, they just made me feel really stupid. Every time I fucked up, every time I misread or I misunderstood a sentence, I would be really hard on myself. Now it's like there's a weight, there's a pressure off because I'm like, it's just the dyslexia. That's why I read fish instead of fist. It's fine. I hope that makes sense to everybody. So alright everybody, that's all I got for you this week. Do you have dyslexia? Do you have a different learning disorder? Are you neurotypical? I hope you found this video at all informing and entertaining. That probably meant informative and entertaining, but you're getting what you're getting. Please do remember that I host live streams on Mondays at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, and I make and post these videos on Wednesdays. Remember folks, if you're curious about whether or not I can write, you can check out my website here at samanthaalnasset.com. I got a flash fiction up there, or if you want to stalk my social media, that's cool too, at Samantha L. Nasset on Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, and Facebook. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, comment down below to help me in the algorithm. Maybe subscribe to the channel and ring-a-ding that bell. Hope to see you soon. Sam out.